You are listening to the Horse Radio Network, part of the Equine Network family.
You're listening to the Show Jumping Podcast, a fun and informative show for riders, owners, trainers, grooms, and fans of all levels.
I'm Ashley Winch in Kansas City, Missouri.
And I'm Kristy McCormick in Saratoga Springs, New York. And you're listening to the Show Jumping Podcast, where we deliver at-home riding exercises to our listeners and chat with fellow horse enthusiasts about the world of show jumping. Today, we're joined by a former client and current friend of mine, Cate Chant. Cate is a trainer at her own barn, True North, in Kenora, Ontario, and is currently showing in Wellington, Florida for the winter. Hi, Cate. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Can you give our listeners a little bit of your horse background?
Definitely. So it's actually a little bit of a mystery how I first became interested in horses, because I grew up in the city and nobody in my family rode. But I was always obsessed with them. I desperately wanted to become a show jumper, and I wanted to read and learn everything there was to know about horses. So
Nice.
I started riding lessons when I was 8, and I got my first pony when I was 12, but it was very much a backyard situation. I didn't have anybody knowledgeable helping me, and I rode in a synthetic dressage saddle that I jumped in, and my bridle was bright orange because I didn't know you were supposed to oil tack. So
You're self-taught.
I did go very much self-taught, and when I did eventually move to a show barn, it was a steep learning curve in the sense of learning to actually do things properly.
We all
And
start somewhere.
I think so. We all start somewhere, and you have to have empathy for those people because we can't pretend we haven't been there. So
Yes, exactly. Everybody has to start somewhere. Nobody comes into this knowing what the hell they're doing.
Exactly. And I came into the industry as far as the show circuit pretty late compared to a lot of people who have a successful junior career. So at 15 or 16, I was still doing the 2-6 hunters. And I eventually moved up to the junior hunters in the equitation in my last junior year. So I did get the chance to do what I wanted to do, but just sort of scraping by, through the skin of my teeth, and then took 5 or 6 years off riding completely when I aged out and went to college.
And then that's when I went to, right? When you were in college, in Boston, right? And you went to what school again?
I went to Wheaton College in Massachusetts. And at the time, my parents made it clear they weren't willing to pay my tuition and horse shows. But I had one horse who was sort of tricky to ride, and he never would have passed a vet check. So I got to keep him because he was impossible to sell. And I still got to do a couple horse shows a year, 1 or 2 day shows with you, Kristy. And that was a really fun time. And then
that was so fun. Little Cedric was a little, he was a challenge for us to work with, I would say, but I loved working with him. I love horses that are not straightforward because they give you problems you have to solve. So I thought that was really fun. And you are such an actual problem solver, in your personality. So I think we really hit it off and had a good time.
Exactly. I think we had a lot in common that way. And Cedric was one of those horses. And I seem to attract these horses where they make you want to pull your hair out working with them, but then they have such wonderful personalities that they sort of endear themselves to you anyway. And that's been the kind of horse I think that keeps coming back to me in my life.
Yeah, that is a great segue to my first question. Is what do you value in horses? And I think the more specifically, what did you value as a kid and growing up versus what you value now? So we're talking now that college was what for you? 15
a very long
years ago?
A long time ago. I think,
okay.
yeah.
Very long is relative. So
well, long enough.
At least a decade. Let's say that,
yeah.
right? Okay. I mean, I know the personalities of horses that I've worked with you, and certainly I've had what seems like a billion over the years. What did you value then? And what do you value now in these
So
animals?
I think that I don't know that I've changed that much over time, but I think that looking back on it, when I was a junior specifically, I was very outcome oriented. I think like a lot of kids, I really wanted to go to medal finals. And the equitation was sort of the standout goal for me. And that's really what provided a lot of structure for me in wanting to be all in the industry. And then as an adult, and specifically the way that I do it now, where I don't have my amateur status, but realistically, I'm not going to have a career in the Grand Prix. I'm never going to be, on a Nations Cup team. I think that I've learned to appreciate the process a lot more, and just the time spent with horses and getting to know them and developing them as individuals. And I think that's something that sort of carried me through the sport in the different iterations that I've been involved in it.
Yeah, I think the individuality that the horses bring to us is really important. We live in a sport that's so standardized, or we're trying to standardize it, and I just think that doesn't really work for each individual horse that we train. I think for me as a kid, I don't know if I was outcome oriented, but I was quantity oriented. Like I wanted to ride the most, I wanted to ride all the time, and I wanted to see how many horses, I could get my hands on. And I wasn't a wealthy kid either. I needed to, go by the favors of other professionals who would, exchange maybe some work for a horse to ride, or even let me, try to sell their horse for them while they're letting me show it. And I think that understanding that each horse was very different took me a long time to figure out. And I realized that taking the time to know their personality, on the ground, meaning if we're not in attack, and how they not just want to be treated, but how they interact with humans, and that personality that we sort of push to the side sometimes and say, no, you have to do it this way, is so important.
I think that's such a good point. And I think too, so often in the hunter jumper industry, we look at a horse and we think we're understanding them by knowing whether it would prefer to be a hunter or a jumper or an equitation horse.
Yeah.
And I think at the end of the day, not every horse wants to be a show horse. And the ones that do are really doing us a big favor by participating and trying to help us meet our end goals, because a horse never wakes up and wants to win junior hunter finals.
Exactly. Half the time they don't understand why we're even there doing that, and why they have to be lunged for an hour in the morning before we get on them. And imagine how confusing that must be to them, especially those who we try to put not to be cliche, but I'm going to be, but put the round peg in a square hole and say, you look the part of this, so let's make you into this, type. And instead of letting the horses teach us, I've had to learn a lot about not putting expectations on horses that are so high that they can't even deliver, halfway. Sometimes we get some jumpers in the barn that just don't want to do it. And you go, okay, well, maybe you want to be a dressage horse and not jump, but you're very talented on the flat. But that's hard to learn. That takes a lot of courage to say, to stop the train, if you will, and say, we're going to change course here.
I think that took me a really long time to learn too, because looking back on it and looking at Cedric, who was sort of the prototype of a difficult horse, I made him do things and he was kind enough to humor me in doing them because those were my goals. But if I had that same horse today, I don't think I would be jumping him around a 1.20 meter course, because he made it pretty clear that it was not going to be on his terms if we made it all the way around. So I think sometimes we lose sight of what's best for the horse when we're trying to reach our own goals, and we're sort of laser focused on what matters the most to us.
Right. I mean, how many times we have to fall off, whether a horse stops at a jump or spooks because they're not comfortable in a certain environment, before we go, oh, maybe we should adapt to the horse instead of forcing them to adapt to us. They, like you said, we're so privileged to have any horses that at least, behave a little bit the way we want them to. And so listening to them, and like you said, individually is just really crucial to going forward in any way. I mean, sometimes I wish that we didn't have to ask horses to do these crazy things. We could just let them be animals in a field. And the business side of that is not going to work that way. But I appreciate people like you who can at least learn that at a young enough age to then adjust your own expectations as you go.
That's a very humbling and important part of the sport, I
Yeah.
think.
So you also have a second career that you've gone through, isn't that right?
I do, yes. And I came about modeling in the complete opposite way of how I got involved in horses.
Did you?
So I
Okay.
had
So
no interest at all in the fashion industry or being a model or anything to do with fashion, really. But I got scouted by a photographer when I was on the subway at 17. And I remember
so we're
thinking
talking you're kind of near the end of your junior career, right? Riding
yeah,
is before college.
exactly. I had 1 year of high school left. I was in my last junior year, second to last junior year. So completely focused on horses, 100% obsessed with them. That was the only thing I cared about. And I was on the subway on my way home from school, and a photographer came up to me and asked if I had ever thought about modeling.
And were you totally
And
surprised, or was that something that was sort of, that was maybe in the back of your mind as like a pipe dream someday?
oh no, I was 100% surprised. I
Okay.
saw this man staring at me, and I thought, I'm getting murdered today. Like, this is the end.
Did you pull out your mace
for 10
before?
minutes. Yeah, I was
You
ready to just hop off the subway train. And then my second thought there was, well, if I have any kind of success modeling, maybe I could buy myself a horse that actually wants to do the job. Perhaps
There you go. Right.
the meter 40 isn't out of reach for me. If I'm good at it and I make some money, this could be a means to an end for me where I can become even further invested in horses.
Okay. So still riding horses motivated you to pursue modeling.
100%. It was
your end goal.
always
Okay, got it.
a pursuit of something horse related has kind of directed all my life choices. So I did end up trying modeling. I signed with an agency. I had a pretty successful modeling career. I did it basically full time for 10 years in the United States and in Europe. And I had a lot of cool experiences that way, but it never felt like something that I was really naturally inclined to do. So I was a little bit like the horse that you're forcing to go to the show.
And
when I was a model.
And you were modeling at a pretty high level, right? I mean, you were traveling to, like you said, you went to Europe. You were on magazine covers, right? You represented some pretty cool fashion brands. Am I right in that?
Exactly. I totally had a really successful high-end career that I probably didn't deserve when it came down to it. It was just sheer luck that the right people at the right time took an interest in me. And the whole time, I think I battled a kind of imposter syndrome modeling because unlike riding, where you can work to actually improve your skill set and your knowledge of horses and be a better rider physically, with modeling, it all felt like playing pretend.
Yeah. I was going to ask, did you find was it an escape from riding at all? Did you find any parallels, from riding to modeling?
I think that as far as the two relating to each other, I probably would have been more successful in either industry had I been willing to just completely give up the other thing. But I was intent on doing both. So I always had one foot kind of in each door. And I did learn things that benefited me in the other career. So one thing that comes to mind is as a model, you become really cognizant all the time of what other people think of you and how you're perceived by other people. And I never had a ton of natural self-confidence or poise. I was never, a particularly graceful person, but I did learn to fake it until you make it and embrace the idea that people don't notice your insecurities if you're not acting insecure about them. And I think that really translated to riding for me because I tell my students all the time, a horse doesn't actually know whether or not you're nervous. They only know if you're sitting up and you're breathing and your leg is on. You could be the most scared rider. And if you're acting confident, that's enough to fool them. So just that idea of embracing confidence that didn't come naturally has definitely helped me in both careers.
Yeah, that's huge. I mean, how often do we talk about confidence in riding and that not just to show the horse what we're doing, but to show ourselves what we're doing. And half the time, none of us know what the hell we're doing up there. We're riding a four-legged animal that we think we've trained the right way. And, you hope that at each moment they're really in tune with you around the course. But you and I have all experienced the other effect when they change course. And Yeah, confidence is everything, especially when you don't think you have it. And I think that's true in life too. You gotta pretend that you know what the hell's going on and what you're doing in order to have any sense of confidence.
Exactly. And I can remember listening to an interview with McLean Ward where he said he sometimes throws up. He's so nervous before a big Grand Prix.
Mm.
And I remember being so surprised by that because you are in your head thinking you're the only person who feels that way. And in reality, other people have just found a way to embody confidence to get the job done.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. What got you out of modeling? Did you just want to do horses full time?
It was sort of an unintentional segue for me where my career sort of fizzled out around the same time as the pandemic because it just wasn't realistic to be flying places for jobs. Nobody was shooting anything in studios. And I had gotten to the point where I was living in Kenora, which is 24 hours from where I grew up in Toronto. So I always had to fly to jobs. It was never just a one-day thing. And the pandemic made it so that wasn't really a possibility. So at that point, I sort of became more involved with the horses on a full-time scale. And it got to the point where I was so involved in both that I really had to pick one. And the horses you can do a lot longer, I think, than modeling,
Sure.
which has sort of an age cap on when you can be successful.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I've seen some of your photos. They're incredible. And you look like you have all the confidence in the world. I'll say that. Did you find any parallels? This is really like, I'm interested in this. Did you find any parallels with modeling and, where you're in an industry where you're showing off, you're supposed to be sort of in almost perfect form, right? To show off the fashion that you're displaying. And then sometimes at least in the hunters, we dress these horses up to be as perfect as they can be. Did you find any parallels there and could take what you maybe didn't like from modeling and apply it to what we ask of the horses?
I don't think that at the time that would have crossed my mind, but in hindsight, I certainly have a lot of empathy for horses because you really are like a show pony when you're a model, in the sense that your diet is decided for you, your appearance is decided for you, what you're wearing, your schedule. When it comes down to it, you don't have a lot of autonomy. And I don't think that's really very different from what we ask of a hunter that's waking up at 5 a.m. to go lunch so they're quiet enough. And then we're going to braid you with this really uncomfortable hairstyle. Then we're going to take you and you have to perform. And it doesn't matter if it's hot or cold or you don't like how your girth feels on you or what the rider is doing. At the end of the day, there are so many similarities there. And even if it's not something I was thinking of at the time, I'm sure that that's helped me develop the sort of empathetic perspective that I have towards horses and all animals generally.
Right. Well, and you're such an animal advocate. I know that, on the side as well. So it's hard. I just think it's hard not to see once you've been through an experience like that, where you're as a model put on display and how we treat these horses. And again, you and I treat the horses, or we're part of a community that treats horses as well as they, can be treated. Obviously, we take care of their legs. We select their diets to be their healthiest, not just their prettiest. We try to really make sure that they're cared for as well as possible. And that really ultimately should be, if we're going to put them in any athletic endeavor, that should be the first priority. It's just sort of an interesting parallel, I think, and stepping back from the show world just a little bit in my shoes, I see that so clearly now. Whereas you're right, when you're in it, you don't think about it. You're like, yeah, this is what we do. We go to the ring and, if we don't have 40 braids, we have 45. And if we don't have, the whitest coat or the shiniest boots, then we need to make them shinier. And it just sometimes makes me question, what are the priorities in our sport sometimes these days, as far as are we working on how valuable the horse is in its athleticism, or are we working on how beautiful they are? And maybe they can coincide, but I wanted to know how you felt, being a model and doing that.
I think it's so interesting that you brought that up because I never would have thought of it that way. But then you look at it and like for me, I think of the number of times that I've, had to twitch a horse or trank them to clip them. And at the end of the day, what does it really matter if they have fuzzy ears?
Right.
But
I mean, there's a biological reason for them to have fuzzy ears, and we just take that right off because we think it looks good.
by the same token, I can remember going to modeling jobs where the agency would specifically put in bold on the email where you got your schedule, make sure you're fully waxed. You can't have any body hair going into the job. So it's one of those things where these industries that are built around an external experience or the appearance of something don't always take into consideration what's best for the person or animal being subjected to it. And so many of the things that we do with horses are tied into these sort of archaic traditions where we've just standardized things and we say this is the way it has to be done. And in the time that I was in the modeling industry, and I do think this has changed a little bit, it was very much the same in that everybody was expected to wear the same size clothes and have the same measurements. Yeah. And when it came down to it, there wasn't a lot of consideration for how that was affecting people who didn't naturally fit into that mold.
Sure, exactly. I mean, I can only imagine the torture that would bring on with knowing, you have a shoot coming up and you are, afraid to not just put on weight, but you might have to lose a few pounds and fit into that that outfit. And I think that even for riders, I do think the standards they're widened now in terms of what is obviously we're riding horses, so we want to be of an appropriate weight for them on their backs. But, look how the fashion industry has changed in riding. We still have these very, very traditional outfits. But at least we're allowing for, we have stretch jackets and we don't encourage everybody to be just stick thin in order to do well. And at least in the juniors in the equitation.
Definitely. And I think even, having zippers in our boots, we've really come a long way.
Yeah. Isn't that silly? We've come so far because we have zippers in our calf height boots. Come on.
Our moms don't have to pull us out of our field boots after every horse.
I remember that, like being on my back going, please pull these off. And it was just torture at the end of a day riding. Oh, yeah. So we have made some advances. I would love to see the industry keep doing that in terms of what's best for the horse. I thought one of the greatest things about COVID was no braiding. I mean, and imagine how the horses must have felt. I don't know if they're smart enough to realize what the freedom they had and it sounds so silly, but not braiding, going to the hunter ring, kind of made everyone a little more on the same playing field. And B was probably way more comfortable for the horses. And C made putting them away so much easier.
I think the other thing too was eliminating the jog during COVID. I can remember waiting with my children's hunter at the ring for like 120 trips to go, just in case I made the cutoff, and I'd be there thinking, oh, okay, I scored an 84.5. So the cutoff right now is 81. I better stay up here just in case.
Sure.
And I think it's crazy in hindsight that we didn't just start jogging a circle on a loose rein at the end 10 or 15 years ago.
Exactly. How many hours have horses spent at the ring when they should have been put away back at the barn in their stalls, put to bed, and instead we're just and I understand obviously we want to make sure they're all sound, but you're right, that could have easily, the rule of trotting at the end of a course could have easily been enforced years ago. So at least COVID gave us a couple of those things. It would have been nice if we had to, have a little bit more relaxation on the wardrobe we have to wear, but we'll get there maybe.
I still think that. I can't believe that in the year of 2024, we're still putting our hair in our helmets.
Right? Putting our hair in our helmets, wearing these sort of, tweed looking jackets, whether they are stretch or not. And I mean, every other sport in life has turned to athleticism, wear that supports athleticism. And I don't feel there's nothing athletic about the way I feel when I put on a show coat.
See, I would agree with that. And then oddly, my husband, who was a professional hockey player, had a
Sure.
completely different opinion when I expressed that thought one day. And he
What was
said,
that?
I don't know why you think you're so special. Every sport has a uniform. He said,
Wait, I know your husband. Has Mike ever put on this uniform though? Let's
think
go back.
he should before he expresses an opinion on it. I did sort of see what he was getting at, but I still think we could do it in a more athletic fabric.
He was a professional hockey player. He got to wear a jersey and loose pants. We have to wear as tight fitting clothing as I think I've ever put on. And it's not like yoga clothing. It's hot and double layered. And I think that's our next job, is to get Mike to have an outfit that he should wear. And by the way, if Mike does listen to this, I love his opinions about riding, because usually they're so accurate in terms of a non-horse person looking at what we do and making sense, trying to make sense of it all. But the outfit, it is a uniform. I'll give him that, but I would love a more comfortable outfit.
I'm with you on that one. I think there's room for improvement.
Yeah, exactly. Another question I wanted to ask you was, you're spending your winters in Wellington, and then you sort of flip the scale and go north to a small town community in the summertime. What, most of our, I guess we have listeners from all places, but if the listeners who are in more of that small town riding environment, what kind of value can you pick out in what you get to experience in the summer for people who get to don't get to experience, and I shouldn't even say get to, it's not like Wellington's such, an amazing place. It just happens to be the busiest because that's where the warm weather is. Can you compare what you value in each place for riding?
Absolutely. So I love the summertime. I love I guess for me, it's the off season with my horses, what would typically be someone's show season, because I tend to show more when I'm in Wellington. But for me, the biggest difference when I'm at home is just the sheer amount of time spent with my horses. So I do all my own care. I coach myself. I coach my students. I take care of the farm, do the stalls. I trailer the horses myself. So I spend days on the road with them, going to horse shows. And I just think that the relationship you develop with a horse when you're that involved in their care and their day-to-day life far exceeds anything you get to experience even in the highest end full care program at a typical show barn. Sure. So the benefits of showing locally and being involved in the industry on that scale for me have been so rewarding. And it's the best part of having a life with horses and being involved with them. And I don't think either that that's something that only applies to me, because I know when I'm at local shows, I see a lot of kids who are up early braiding their own horses. When I'm the one who gets up at 5 a.m. to lunge my own horses at a big show, it's usually me and a lot of grooms. Whereas at home, you see a lot of people doing their own care, and they have that intimate knowledge of the horse, and they understand how to dig in a little bit and train a horse and have that do-it-yourself mentality. And I just think that type of horsemanship is such a wonderfully valuable skill, and something that is honestly lost on people who only get to participate in the industry as a client in that typical full care or show barn setting. There's so many valuable things you learn from being involved in your horse's care. And for me, you can't put a price tag on that kind of experience.
Sure. And it goes back to getting to know the horses' personalities individually. I think in a place like Wellington, that becomes a bit of a marathon for everybody, for riders and trainers and grooms. It's just always about getting the day finished and, going, and I wouldn't say going through the motions all the time. We're all there to keep improving, you hope, but there's very little time to spend on getting to know your horses. And I agree. I think if your summer is spent showing at a level where you're in charge of your own horse and you're not relying on, and like you said, you're in a show barn situation in Wellington, and then you're totally in charge in the summertime, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I'm at two complete opposite spectrums.
Sure. And yeah, I think the more intimately that you can know your horse, the better you're going to understand what to ask of them. I think that goes back to that as well. So I just hope that while everyone's in Florida and while everyone's enjoying that show, that they can take the time to step back and notice how their horse behaves outside the show ring. I think that's such a big deal. We all focus on what the ring can produce, and sometimes that's usually actually not sometimes usually that's the consequence of all of the actions that happen outside the ring, and we tend to look at it in the reverse. So I love that you love summers. I love that summers are a calmer place for horses to, have that, or for us to enjoy the horses. How is your Wellington going so far?
It's been really good. I love being in Florida just from a sense of the sheer access to help that I have here, because I really do have to dig in and be self-reliant the rest of the year.
Yeah.
So to have
because you live in the
from somebody on the ground in
north place ever.
Exactly. Like beyond it just being nice out here, having people who can help me and an eye on the ground and feedback and encouragement, and the sort of community that you develop being a client at a barn has been really nice. And it also just affords me a level of time in my life outside of horses that doesn't exist at home the way that I do things.
Right. You get to spend more time because someone else is doing the work. There's the flip side, right? Because someone not doing the work, but doing the groundwork or taking care of your horse, that you get to have more time to yourself. Yeah. I mean, there's pluses and minuses to both sides of it. I think that it's just so refreshing to hear you talk about keeping your horse's personality in the forefront of your mind, especially as you go forward, and we're all on this bit of a process and learning about ourselves on the horse, and the relationship we have with them teaches us every day. And I mean, that's why I still do it, as I still try to let horses teach me about myself, and hopefully I can bring something to their lives. And if that, can be on a cohesive path together, fantastic. And so it's nice to see that carried on to what you're doing as well, especially one of my former students. So it's really nice to see.
Exactly. And I think if you're doing it for the love of the horse, you can never be too disappointed. Whereas if you're doing it in pursuit of goals for yourself as an athlete, or even for the partnership you have with the horse, that leaves a lot of room where the outcome is different from what you were hoping for. Whereas if you're just there because you love spending time with your horse and you love the animal, that's always something to fall back on.
Yeah, well, they're right in your answer the last, 5 minutes here. And I asked how your Wellington was going. Not once did you say, "Oh, it's great, I won this class, last week," or I didn't do well in this class. The result should be just the last thing that we all think about, and how it's going with your horse as a relationship with them should be first. So you're clearly doing it. I applaud that.
Thank you. I learned it from you.
Wonderful. Well, great. This has been fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us. I do miss seeing you in Wellington and Mike, and I do miss hearing Mike-isms and how I love hearing someone's opinion about what they see in the horse world, because I think we have such a weird, unique sport that we try to make not weird. And I think it's awesome to hear some people when they can watch what we're doing and kind of give us a little reality check. I don't have anything, and of course, right this second to mind what he said in the past, but sometimes I know what you've said to me is just, it's a great perspective. Like,
he has always devastatingly accurate takes. You can spend 20 years in an industry just trying to learn more, and he's been just watching for a couple of years and can watch something and just pinpoint the source of a problem or why somebody's doing so much better than someone else in 30 seconds. You're like,
yes,
there it is. Stated so simply.
I think at one point you and I were dealing with your horse that had trouble with a particular jump. And I remember you telling me that, a few days in, Mike said, he just doesn't like the color blue. Does he have to jump that color? You're right. Why does he have to jump blue? I know there are blue jumps in the ring, and we're not really always in charge of what they are, but wouldn't that be so great if we could just take what we're talking about and adapt to each horse and just give them what they want to do and not what we want them to do?
Exactly. And I think sometimes that outlook just informs our problem solving too, because you can spend all week trying to find the right bit or trying to
Yep.
establish more rideability on a certain track. And when it comes down to it, sometimes it's just exposing your horse more to what we expect of them that's standing out to them, because they don't count strides. They just see what they're looking at and try to
Right.
guess what we're telling them to do.
They don't know what a distance is. They're just taking off when it's time to get to the jump, So
Exactly.
we maybe the lesson we need to learn is how to adapt to them.
Exactly.
Not the other way around.
I think that really should be everyone's motto.
It should. Exactly. That's the theme for this podcast. Yes. All right. Well, I won't take up any more of your time on your day off, but thank you very much for joining. And please do say hi to Mike. And I may ask you to come back on the podcast again in the future.
I would love to. This has been really fun. Thank you for having me.
Okay. Thanks, Cate. Talk to you soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
I love how you and Cate both touched on prioritizing taking care of our equine partners and valuing their well-being, which our title sponsor, Reline GI, can help with. Reline GI is a natural, long-term alternative that goes beyond masking symptoms. This unique blend of gut-friendly hyaluronan and wellness-boosting beta-glucan works with your horse's body to soothe and protect their digestive system. Unlike traditional therapies that can disrupt digestion and nutrient absorption, Reline GI leaves your horse's natural balance intact. But don't take our word for it. Reline GI is field tested by leading veterinarians and backed by peer-reviewed research, including a study by Dr. Nathan Slovis showing it effectively reduces gastric ulcers in active horses. Plus, it's clean sport certified, safe for competition use. Don't forget to use code SJP at checkout for 10% off, linked in our show notes.
This past weekend, I was able to teach a clinic at Wildwood Farm in Westford, Massachusetts, where trainer Lexi Horlacher has a lovely group of students. I had a wonderful time there. We set a course that was a figure 8 in their indoor ring, and we had 2 diagonal jumps set up, an end jump as a cavaletti, and then at the opposite end, we had 3 jumps in a row that were set on a turn as bounces. So the bounces were about 9 feet to 9 feet in between each jump. But they were set on an angle. So you came in on a bit of an angle. The center jump was perpendicular to the end of the ring. And then the third one coming out was on an angle as well as at a turn. And then we added an outside line on one side. And it was a very straightforward course that asked a lot of questions, and everybody did so well. My favorite group actually was a group that were, 10 and 11-year-olds. And while they didn't have to do the most difficult track, which was the whole figure 8 all put together, including the outside line, they really nailed everything I asked of them. And we worked on how you could collect to the end jumps and go forward to the diagonal jumps. And I had a great time. I even got to ride one of their nice, cute hunters who's young and coming along, and brought me back a few memories from being in the hunter ring. So it was lovely. I can't thank Lexi enough for having me, and her students were a treat to teach. So I'm looking forward to going back.
Now, Kristy, I was recently on the HRN Horse Lovers cruise, and actually one of our auditors asked where they could find you. They were interested in a clinic. So what is the best way for our listeners, if they were interested in hosting you, getting a hold of you?
They just need to look me up on Facebook. I have messages there that I can easily check. So if you either go on our Facebook group, which is Overheard on the Show Jumping Podcast, you should be able to find my profile on there, or just type in the search bar, Kristy McCormick. I have a profile, and send me a private message. And I'm always looking for new places to host a clinic, or to be hosted at a clinic. So I would love to hear from anybody who's interested in having a group that I can teach.
Yeah, especially if it's like somewhere warmer, right?
That's even better. Yeah. Double, half off if you want to get me somewhere warm in the winter months.
Oh, that's great. I love, there is something still magical to me about seeing, and I hope no one takes offense, seeing little girls on their ponies going around the ring with their hearts in it. It's just, it takes you back to why, when you fell in love with the sport and just the magic of it. It's special.
It does. And clinics are such a great place for me to get to share my knowledge with a variety of groups of riders. I mean, and clinics aren't supposed to be just for the, most elite group of the bunch. They're actually meant to be, as teaching clinics, relatable for everybody. And I have to say, going back to how you just said, how can people contact me? I didn't know Lexi until I showed up for her clinic, but she reached out on Facebook and asked if I would have time. And it ended up that her farm was very close by to a farm where a former employee of mine currently works. And she ended up bringing some horses over to join the clinic as well, which was so great. And it was such a nice full circle moment for me to see this girl who's now in a training position have her own kids there, and it was just fun. So clinics are such a great place to see where kids are starting, and if you haven't seen any kind of potential in them, to encourage them along. So yeah, and any new faces are a great part of my day.
I love that. And, talking about full circle moments, we are both very excited to bring back our question and answer segment. And from one of our previous episodes, you had on an international rider, and we talked about some of the differences in competing overseas versus competing here in America. So this question comes from Nicola, who is a UK listener and a part of our Facebook group, Overheard on the Show Jumping podcast. And she wrote in a couple extra questions. She was wondering about holding up rings while waiting for your trainer and the expenses of US shows. And just off the bat, myself obviously being an American rider with most of my experience competing here in America, I was in Italy at a regional show, and I was waiting for my trainer to get to the warm-up ring and, waiting for him to say, okay, Ashley, and, adjust the fence to be my height and all the things that we come to expect, at least most of the time here in the States in the warm-up ring. And there was probably, I don't know, let's say 30 other horses and riders, going around, walk, trot, canter, warming up. And he gets there and he was kind of frazzled and Italian. And I love Matteo as the day is long. And he's just like, Ashley, what are you waiting for? You are next up. You must hurry. And I'm like, okay, but what fence? Because there's just 3 verticals in the middle of a sea of horses all going at various speeds. And I already have so much anxiety to begin with. He's like, jump, vai, which means go in Italian. And I'm like, okay. And so I just leave the herd and I go pop over the fence 2 times. And he's like, okay, we are ready. Let's go. And off we go and in the ring and we go around and it was fine. But I was absolutely terrified, Kristy.
Sure.
I was overwhelmed.
You're used to, like you said, your trainer setting your own jump for you and waiting for you to be ready.
Exactly.
And that's not how it works over there. You either are ready or you're not. You're going in or you're not. And I think we talked a little bit about the schooling area on that podcast. And I'm sure Nicola from the UK is wondering about how the unit, if she's had any experience now here, being in the States, holding up rings is something that is so it interrupts the day, but it happens all the time. And it happens because of that exact reason, that these students are so reliant on their trainers that they do need. And that's how our American system is pretty set up for. It's where the trainers are hand-holding the entire time in the schooling area. And we are, and believe me, I have been those students. I need my trainer to tell me what to do and when and how, or I think I do.
Right.
And the lack of independence is a little startling. However, it's how our system works. And so what is an interesting point that sometimes the exhibitors don't see is the work that goes into, especially a busy trainer with multiple students in a barn and at horse shows with multiple rings. I mean, I remember spending at least half an hour to 40 minutes on my computer the night before each day at the horse show, organizing. And I was one of those people that I really loved getting to know the in-gate guys or the in-gate girls, and the staff at the horse show that run the in-gates is so valuable at a horse show. So if I could get chummy enough with them for them to give me their number, I would text them at night and say, hey, this is my tentative plan. I know my student goes in your class at maybe 10 o'clock. I have to do A, B, and C at 9:30. This is how I'm going to try to get to you. And most of the time, that's very appreciated on the in-gate side because it helps them organize their day. And in a perfect world, everybody just flows beautifully through the show, and no ring is held up ever where that doesn't happen. And so it's interesting to me to watch the in-gate people communicate with each other. And that's possibly the difference between a B show and an A+ show and how it's run. There are definitely some shows where in-gate crew don't communicate with each other. And there are so many trainers who think it's easiest to sort of get up and float through their day. And that boggles my mind. I'm really very much a type A organizational person. So I need to have a plan. And when it doesn't go as planned, I need to have a correction right away. So I can see, though, the frustration in exhibitors when the ring is held up and you're wondering why that happens. Well, it happens because of disorganization on the trainer's part. And it also happens because many times students need some more time in the warm-up ring and they're not ready to go in. And if the horse show is kind to them, they will let the ring be on hold until they go in. And if they're having a busy day, they might not. But that's a complicated answer to the differences between holding up the ring in Europe and holding up the ring here, which holding up the ring in Europe just doesn't exist.
No.
It's just not part of it one bit.
You're done. Like, there is no holding up the ring.
You miss your turn. You just don't go if you're not ready.
I could see, I don't know. I think that there's a happy medium there somewhere.
Sure, yeah.
We just, nobody's bothered to find it quite yet.
The best horse shows can work with trainers to allow for some gray areas when they're, because things happen at the ring too. Horses lose shoes, riders fall off in the schooling area. Their problems happen, and there have been times where I have had to go to the in-gate person and said, I need more time. I'm not going to be ready with my student. And that's a tough, sometimes you get a look like, are you effing kidding me right now? Because they need me to go in the ring. And sometimes they're chill and they go, hey, it's all right. Take as much time as you need. So I think the best way to prevent that would be communication for sure. But we all need to strive for a little better communication, in my opinion.
And treating each other with, respect and kindness goes a long way. It really does.
Well, thank you for that question, Nicola, and I hope I'm saying your name right.
Yes, me too.
From the opposite side of the pond. I love that someone wrote in from the UK.
And next up,
what's our next question?
Sure. Cheryl from Michigan asks, I do not compete in Florida during the winter. I'm a working adult. Same girl. Any suggestions to keep my horse in good form riding in an indoor all winter? Good exercises, or how can I prep for the spring show season?
Well, I am currently helping some students who are staying home or staying north in the wintertime. And I have, as I've said, had most winters be spent in Florida. And I have to say, I'm loving getting to be creative and figuring out different exercises to use in the indoor. And it's tough. You're limited space. You are usually riding in pretty cold weather. Sometimes you have to skip riding if it's too cold to really exercise your horse. But the best thing I can suggest are take pieces of what you're going to see in the summer when you horse show in terms of a course and set them and really try to master them. We don't usually have the time when we're showing to master certain elements. And for example, I set just 2 diagonal lines the other week, and we spent 2 weeks on them, and we spent how to come forward out of the turn and adjust in the line. We spent time on how to be dead straight. An indoor has walls that you can use and markers that you can have help straight, at least visually try to keep your horse as straight as possible, doing different number of strides in each line. I think that it's hard to set a full show course inside. So doing anything that can break down what parts of the course are parts that you have trouble with at home or at horse shows, you can work on at home. And maybe that's just a single jump out of the turn and you have all of this space, by itself to use, and just repeat that until you love it. You can also use gymnastics. That's a great way to keep your horse fit. Jumping wise, that's a great use of the space in an indoor where you don't have a lot of striding available. But if you can set 2 or 3 jumps in a row that are 1 or 2 jumps, 1 or 2 strides apart, and they don't have to be big. They can be small. They can be about 2.6, maybe 2.9 or 3 foot high, and work on your own position and work on keeping your weight balanced down in your heel and work on your back being nice and flat and your eyes up. Those kind of little things that we, again, don't address all the time on course. And when you're prepping for the spring show season, think about your horse's fitness. Think about what you're going to be asking them cardiovascularly when you get to the course. Ride your horse and work on an open stride as much as you can. Sometimes in indoors, we get really tight and slowing down. So gallop down the long side, let them, get a good canter, have someone check on you to make sure that they can agree that you're going the same speed that you would go over a course. It's easy to think you're going fast enough, but you're really not. So adding your elements of each part that you're going to address at the horse show is my advice for using the best of your time over the winter.
Now, Kristy, I think you got in a couple questions that are around a theme that we spoke about in one of our previous episodes talking about distances, but I'd love for you to get back into that because I think no matter how often you practice finding distances, we all mess up. At least I do.
Yes. And, as far as finding good distances goes, it's, as professionals, we all think that it just happens, and it doesn't. It first goes back to those first couple of podcasts I did when I talked about pace and track, that you got to master that. You got to know how fast you're going and how slow you're going, and you got to be in control of it. And you also have to steer. So steering and pace, brakes, gas, and each side of the reins, those are the 4 aids that you really need to understand what to do. If you have a pretty good feeling of those and still feel like your distances are questionable, or you're just not sure what to do when you do see a distance, the best piece of advice I can say is to just stay the same. Keep the same canter, keep the same track. Your horse if they're at the speed you want and they're on the track you want, their rhythm should get you to the fence in a pretty organized fashion. And you might need to make some small adjustments the last couple of strides. The biggest mistake you can make is make too many adjustments too far away. It's very rare for someone to see a distance who's not a very active professional who's jumping all the time to see a distance further than 4 or 5 strides away. If you do, and you have a good eye, that's great, but trust it and trust that that's going, what you see first is going to work out. But if what you see 8, 9, 10 strides away looks like something that you have to micromanage and do something about, it's probably wrong. So let it go, ignore it. There's always another distance that's going to come up, and trust your horse's canter as you get there. And just the last 2, 3, 4 strides, say, what can I do to make these strides the best? And that usually means a little extra leg and go forward, or pull on the reins and collect your horse and try to let them fit that step in.
Well, that does it for today's episode of the Show Jumping Podcast. Be sure to find us on our Facebook group, Overheard on the Show Jumping Podcast, and send in your questions there or directly to me, Ashley at HorseRadioNetwork.com. Big thanks to our title sponsor, Haggard Pharmacy and Reline GI. Keep your eyes up and your heels down.